Hello, class, and welcome. So, as we continue on, exploring a little bit about different research approaches in psychology, there are those that may not be interested in advanced math and inferential statistics. And so, we can take a different route, and that is descriptive research, where we seek to predict what already exists in a group or population. So this would be something like an opinion poll to determine people's beliefs about something. Descriptive studies, and within descriptive studies, we don't really measure the effect of a variable. Rather, they only seek to describe a variable. And then along those lines, then you can have correlational studies. And this is where you investigate the connection between two or more variables. And you're wanting to consider the relationships between them. Another area along these lines would be, looking at cross-sectional research, where we bring in the issue of time. And along those lines, there are also issues then of maturation. The person changes over time. And so here we can have cross-sectional research, and we can also have longitudinal research, and cross-sectional research really takes place at a single point in time, where all tests, measures, and variables are administered to participants on one occasion. And this type of research then seeks to gather data on present conditions instead of looking at the effects of a variable over a period of time. So that's a snapshot of time. Longitudinal research, on the other hand, is a study that takes place over a period of time, and data is first collected at the beginning of the study and may be gathered repeatedly throughout the length of the study. So some longitudinal studies may occur over a short period of time, such as a few days, while others may take place over a period of time like months or years or even decades. And the effects of aging are often investigated through longitudinal research. Now, we can also look at the relationship between various variables and the connections between variables in our correlational research. Now, correlation is the measurement of the relationship between two variables. And these variables already occur in the group or the population and are not controlled by the experimenter. So there's a positive correlation, and that is a direct relationship, whereas the amount of one variable increases, the amount of the second variable increases. Now, a negative correlation is when the amount of one variable goes up, the level of the other variable goes down. And in both types of correlation, there is no evidence or proof that changes in one variable cause changes in the other variable. A correlation simply indicates that there is a relationship between two variables. So the most important concept I want to leave with you here is that correlation does not equal causation. And oftentimes in research, that gets confused with the media or with the general population. But as a consumer of psychological research, I want to be clear that you know the difference. Correlation does not equal causation. Then there is the clinical method, and the clinical method is very similar to the interview technique. And here the investigators usually interested in testing hypotheses by presenting the research participant with a task or stimulus of some sort, and then inviting a response. And after the participant responds, the investigator typically asks a second question or introduces it, a new task, to clarify the participant's original answer. Now, although participants are often asked the same question, initially each participant's answers determines what he or she is asked next. So the clinical method is a flexible approach that considers each participant as unique. Now, Jean Piaget was a famous French researcher, and what he did was he observed children, but he also relied extensively on the clinical method to study children's intellectual development in even a child's moral reasoning skills. And the data from research really kind of can build up a large library of protocols and ways of understanding children. So, for example, from Piaget's work on the development of moral reasoning, which says that a young child thinks about lying in a different way than adults think about it. So he asked, "Do you know what a lie is?" It's when you say what isn't true. Is 2 plus 2 equal 5 a lie? Yes, it's a lie. Why? Because it isn't right. Now, did the boy who said 2 plus 2 equals 5? No, it wasn't right. Or did he make a mistake? He made a mistake. Then if he made a mistake, did he lie, tell a lie or not? Yes, he told a lie. So that just would go to show, if a child would say something like that. So that just goes to show you some ways that you can do observations and get some very different and interesting ways of gathering knowledge. Now, there's also case studies. And in a case study, you're really interested in looking at the details of a single individual and how they function. And so it involves collecting records and cases and interviewing people and collecting information about family background and socioeconomic status and health records and academic records and work history and performances and psychological tests. And it's a very in-depth process. There's also an ethnography, and that's a form of participatory research observation. And it's often used in the field of anthropology, but is also used in cultural psychology, where a person engages within a culture and then they collect data about the culture while being engaged within the culture. And it can be very diverse and immersive in the ways that you're collecting the data, but it can bring about some very rich understandings of the complexities, and sometimes can have a huge impact and show the huge impact of culture upon people. And then there's also psychophysiological methods. And increasingly, psychologists have turned to psychophysiological methods and techniques that measure the relationship between physiological responses and behavior, to explore the biological underpinnings of things like perception or cognition and emotional responses. And this too is a very interesting field where you can use what is called an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, or an fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance imaging, or something like eye tracking or electrocephalograms. Lots of different ways of gathering information about the body's responses. So overall, I just want you to be mindful of the fact that there are lots of different ways of collecting information and data. But ultimately, it comes down to what do the experiments do. The experimental data and what it says. Because the experimental design needs to be precise in how it asks the questions and the type of knowledge it develops. And that helps you delineate any issues, just like we had with Clever Hands. And so I hope that makes a little bit of sense for you. So what did we do this week? Well, we looked at the story of Clever Hands and identified that systematically varying conditions can go a long ways to help us to interpret reality more accurately, just like Clever Hands. People originally thought he could read German, that he could do math, and that he could identify proper notes. It turns out he could do none of those things. But it wasn't until there was systematic variation of conditions that we found out in the ways that Hans was clever. Now, it doesn't diminish Hans's cleverness and his uniqueness in the animal world, but it does give us a more accurate picture. And so psychology can be a science in that it uses experimentation to question, to move knowledge forward. And we can use experimental designs where we are proposing a hypothesis and then a null hypothesis. And in so doing, we are ruling out the null hypothesis and choosing the alternative hypothesis in order to understand something. Or that we can look at the phenomenon in other ways. We can describe it using correlational research, or through ethnographies, or through qualitative research, or through clinical methods. There are lots of different ways of doing it, and each one yields its own type of knowledge. And so overall, I just want to encourage you, as you consume information about people in the general media, to be mindful and to be critical. Because in the end, being a critical consumer of psychological information will serve you well in your future career as a social and community service worker. I hope you enjoyed this week. You take care, and I'll see you in our next class. Bye-bye.